The research question that I'll be focusing on for my IO is how do Haruki Murakami and Joseph Boyden explore the damaging effects of violence towards women in their respective texts? But the global issue that I'm looking at is violence towards women. So, gender inequality is a major global issue that persists all over the world, and it has for many years, no matter what steps have been taken to combat it. Of course, the disparity between men and women has decreased a lot, yet gender inequality is still all over the world, hence the term global issue. And as a result of this inequality, violence against women outranking the violence against men has become a major problem and a global issue in and of itself. A frightening statistic is 38% of women worldwide, that being a little over 1 in 3, have experienced or will experience physical or sexual violence at some point in their lives. And the vast majority of this violence is domestic violence, that being violence from a spouse or a partner or just someone that the woman lives with. This violence occurs at very different levels all over the world, with some countries having much higher rates of this violence towards women, but it's undeniable that it's found everywhere and is an issue that really needs to be addressed. The first text that I'll be looking at that explores the issue of violence against women is Kafka on the Shore. This novel is one of Japanese author Haruki Murakami's most popular works. It was written in the early 2000s, and this novel follows a young runaway named Kafka after his father delivered to him a prophecy mimicking the story of Oedipus Rex, that being that Kafka would eventually sleep with his mother and sleep with his sister. Kafka leaves home, and he ends up meeting a girl and an older woman who he believes to be his sister and mother, respectively. Now, this novel has many fantastical elements, such as talking cats and ghosts. However, Murakami never strays into total absurdity or total fantasy. Magical realism, that being the presence of fantasy in a generally normal world, is a key component of many of Murakami's works, and Kafka on the Shore is no exception to this. One of the major themes that is prevalent throughout the novel is the theme of the inescapability of fate and its control over people. All throughout the novel, this occurs, especially with reference to Kafka, who allows fate to dictate his actions throughout most of his journey through Japan. In the passage that I have selected to analyze, Kafka rapes Sakura in a dream of his. Now, this scene is perhaps the most uncomfortable in the entire book and very difficult to read due to its graphic nature and the just generally unappealing subject matter. Nevertheless, it does a quite effective job of highlighting the destructiveness of this abuse. Murakami does not shy away from including graphic imagery in his text. For example, the graphic killing of Johnny Walker earlier in the novel, and this scene is full of graphic imagery. Kafka's actions are described in full detail to the reader, really leaving the reader with quite a bad taste in their mouth. That was definitely my experience with this passage. In order to make it clear to the reader that the extent In order to make clear to the reader the extent of the depravity of Kafka's actions, the whole scene takes place from the perspective of Kafka, being the perpetrator here, as opposed to Sakura, the victim. Kafka's thought processes, as he proceeds to rape Sakura, are communicated to the reader throughout the entire passage. It's clear that Kafka does not have some sort of ulterior motive for raping Sakura. He simply does it because he likes it, and he wants to do it. There's a line, "Her face is expressionless, turned away from you, but you feel the pleasure rising up in her, like an extension of yourself." And this is key to understanding how flawed Kafka is as a person and as a character. Here, Kafka is not only allowing himself to be completely swept away by the pleasure that's rising inside of him, he feels that Sakura is feeling the same pleasure, when it's very apparent that she is not. He's merely trying to project his feelings onto Sakura in order to make himself feel better about what he's doing. By depicting Kafka as nothing more than a depraved rapist, letting himself go to his pleasure in the moment, Murakami ensures that Kafka is seen as the only one doing anything wrong in the scene. While obviously Sakura does not want to have any part in what is occurring, in the real world many women are blamed for their rape or abuse, or accused of enjoying it or allowing it to happen. These accusations are very rarely true, so by focusing on Kafka's actions, Murakami does not leave any room to interpret them in a way that would shift the blame. Kafka himself is a very flawed character, and that contributes to the believability of his character in a book with as many fantastical elements as Kafka on the Shore. Murakami also makes use of an effective metaphor to portray Kafka's feelings in this scene. Kafka losing himself to his pleasure in the moment is symbolized by him getting lost in a forest inside of his own mind. He begins to see the trees looking all the same around him, and he's unable to turn back, so he just feels he might as well continue. Sakura's actions in this scene are very depressing to witness. While initially she tries to persuade Kafka to stop what he's doing, to leave her alone, she even tries to reason with him. However, as she realizes that Kafka is not going to stop, and of course, this is Kafka's dream, so she is powerless to stop him anyway, she simply gives in and stops resisting. Sakura, throughout the novel to this point, has been a very strong character, and has always made her opinions known very well. So to see her having completely given up is a powerful visual of the damaging effects of Kafka's abuse. Another text that I've selected that very accurately and very well depicts the damaging effects of violence towards women is 3-Day Road. This is a novel by Canadian author Joseph Boyden that takes place during the First World War. The novel follows a pair of Cree soldiers, Xavier and Elijah, who enlist only to be faced with racism and prejudice while overseas, among other struggles. This novel was monumental for the Indigenous community. The struggles of Indigenous soldiers was and is a topic that has not been touched on very often in modern literature and in popular literature, so the novel brought the conflicts that they faced into the light. Much like Kafka on the Shore, 3-Day Road is also split into two narratives, that of the ongoing war, and the stories told by Niska, Xavier's aunt, as she rows the young man back home after he leaves the army. The novel deals with many taboo topics, such as racism and drug addiction, in addition to violence against women. The passage that I've selected to analyze is in many ways similar to the first passage found in Kafka on the Shore, but it differs as well. In this passage, Niska has just made love in a church to the Frenchman whom she had been seeing. However, Niska's belief that he is with her out of love is dashed when he reveals his real motive for having sex with her there. The Frenchman believes that by making love to Niska in a church, he was able to take away her akak, or Cree word for spirit. He says to her, "You are nothing special, just another squaw whore. I took your power away in this place and sent it to burn in hell where it belongs." While he may not have raped Niska like Kafka did to Sakura, the Frenchman's actions are just as despicable here as those demonstrated by Kafka. Here it can be seen that Boyden chooses not to focus on just the Frenchman. Rather, the majority of the passage centers around the damage that has been done to Niska, and especially her character and spirit. The tone of this passage is one of desperation, as Niska runs away from the church and the Frenchman, leaving everything behind. The imagery in this passage emphasizes the damage that has just been done to Niska as she runs away. The thorns and rocks that cut her feet don't faze her at all. She says, "I ran along the riverbank, not caring about the stings of bushes on my naked thighs, about the sharp rocks under my feet, or the branches of the trees that hung low." In Niska's mad dash to rid herself of the Frenchman, her concerns for her own safety and from other hazards completely disappear. In addition to the environmental hazards that Niska is exposed to, she also rips off all of her clothing, exposing herself completely in the dangerous wilderness. For a hunter and gatherer like Niska, her complete disregard for her surroundings and personal safety as she runs is not normal for a character. Niska's irrational behavior here is Boyden's method of showing that the Frenchman's despicable act succeeded in breaking her spirit in a way, at least in the short term. While both Murakami and Boyden explore the damaging effects of violence towards women, these two authors choose to examine the topic in different ways. First of all, in Kafka on the Shore, Murakami chooses to have the perspective of Kafka be the one that the reader is subject to, showcasing his own depraved desires and inability to control his own behavior. Boyden, on the other hand, has the reader follow Niska, delivering a first-hand account of the destructive effects that the Frenchman's actions have had on her. Both of these passages take a clear stand on the global issue. The perpetrator has committed a despicable act, and the victim shoulders no blame, as they should. The damage done to both victims is made very clear in both texts. Sakura completely shuts down while being raped, and Niska loses all sense of her surroundings while she escapes. Both of these reactions are very abnormal for the two characters, highlighting the extent of the harm that is done by Kafka and the Frenchman. This global issue is one that should be talked about much more frequently in society, as it seems that it's often set aside, with the general idea being that the two genders are more or less equal as it is, which is clearly not the case. Work needs to be done to prevent senseless violence against women, as it has the capacity to affect nearly every woman in some way in a lifetime. These authors, by showcasing violence towards women in their texts, raise awareness for the issue and bring it into the public eye, which is essential for it to be eradicated and dealt with.